back out live there to southern Israel. We want to bring into the conversation now our friend, retired Marine intelligence officer, national security expert, Hal Kempfer. Hal joins me now. Hal, good to see you. Hope you had a good weekend here. There are a lot of developments to get to. We want to do just that with you as well. Before we get into it, let's put up this tweet here from Fox's Lucas Tomlinson, quoting the Israeli defense minister, Hal. And Yoav Gallant there at that press conference we were just playing said this: Hamas has lost control of Gaza. Terrorists are fleeing south. Civilians are looting Hamas bases. Now, Hal, it seems like the conversation has shifted today specifically and over the weekend to the kind of dire nature and situation that so many of these Gaza hospitals have found themselves in. You sent along this report out of CNN today that a U.S. official with knowledge of American intelligence says Hamas has a command module under the Al-Shifa hospital. It uses fuel intended for it, and its fighters regularly cluster in and around Gaza's largest hospital. So you have so many, Hal, of these demands for a ceasefire, of these demands for Israel to stop targeting places like these hospitals. But this is where Hamas is holed up. This is a huge kind of catch-22, kind of a conundrum here. What is Israel to do if this is where Hamas puts itself?
Well, Andrew, whatever it does, it has to do very carefully because they're going to have to go in there and deal with the Hamas command and control logistics sites, which Hamas deliberately built underneath protected sites under the Geneva Convention. Hospitals by themselves are protected sites. You're not supposed to target a hospital or a school or a religious site. And when you look at how Hamas does business, they use these as firing positions, ammunition, storage areas, command and control, headquarters, all sorts of things. They deliberately put them under schools, hospitals, mosques, simply to force Israel into this very difficult choice of whether to target them. Now, legally, under the international law of war, yes, they can target them. I heard a UN I don't know if I want to call her a spokesman or not, but a UN representative today saying, no, they never lose that status. That's not correct under the law of war. That once they're being used for military purposes, they do lose that protected status. Nonetheless, Israel will still have to take every measure it can to avoid civilian casualties, which means you're not going to see what you've seen with other sites where they use an airstrike and literally drop a building. They're going to have to go in there and literally root them out. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting is, as you saw, as the video shows, Israel actually sent its troops in a very dangerous, precarious situation, carrying gasoline up to or carrying fuel up to the hospital itself. Says here, here's the fuel, run the generators, keep the incubators, neonatal, and other critical medical equipment working. And Hamas came out and said, we're not going to let them take it.
Okay,
and so there's a bit of a catch-22 there in terms of how they're to do this.
I mean, Bibi Netanyahu was on some of the Sunday shows just yesterday, Hal, to which he told Kristen Welker on NBC's Meet the Press that Israel proposed the Shifa hospital to give it fuel, but said the hospital refused. So Israel is kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, Hal. They know this is where Hamas is holed up. But there are people there sheltering in place. There are refugees in these hospitals. There are people who need medical attention. And they have to be very, very careful. Do you think some who are calling for a ceasefire, some who say Israel's perpetrating a genocide, Hal, do they get this nuance?
I don't think they do. I don't think they care. They just don't understand. They don't understand war. And war is not, it was a very eloquent Israeli spokesman talking about this as in talks of proportionality, which is a concept on the law of war. But he said that what you're hearing from college campuses in proportionality is that somehow there should have been an eye for an eye or an equal thing, as if Israel would go out there and do to the Palestinians what Hamas had done to Israelis. That if you kill enough children, babies, old people, whatever, that you get a 1-for-1 ratio. And it's just the thought of it is so horrific under any concept of civilization, not to mention international law. It's ridiculous on the face. But war is a very gruesome business. There's a lot of reasons why People dedicate their lives to the avoidance of war, to try and
Sure.
keep wars from happening. And it's not, proportionality doesn't mean one for one. And that's where they seem to be looking at this. And of course, the numbers for Palestinians, as we've talked about before, all those numbers come from Hamas.
Right.
And Hamas has every reason. It's their mission statement to exaggerate what the Israelis are doing. That's what terrorist groups do. That goes
Yeah.
into the definition of how they operate. So the numbers really cannot be trusted, even though U.S. intelligence says they might not be completely off. Yeah, but they can skew a lot of things, like the number of children that were injured or killed, or a lot of things to make it sound much, much worse than what it is. But the problem is, Hamas has put Israel in this very difficult situation. To
Right.
take out Hamas, you literally have to displace them. Now, I should mention something that I'm hearing about Al-Shifa Hospital is that the IDF has surrounded three sides of it. They leave one side open, and that's the side with the direct access to the safe corridor going south. And what they've been doing is, I think there was some ridiculous number, like 10,000 people were in and around. I hear it's down to less than 1,000 right now, which is pretty considerable. Still, there's a lot of people, a lot of civilians who want to get out, but they have had some success in getting people to move out of Al-Shifa Hospital and the other hospitals as well.
Hal, let's move on to the hostage question yet again. This was an interesting phone call President Biden had over the weekend with the Emir of Qatar. He spoke with him on, I believe, yesterday. So this is what the White House put out as a readout. I'm reading it right now. Biden, expressed his appreciation to Qatar and Sheikh Tamim personally for his earlier efforts to secure the release of hostages from Hamas, including 2 American citizens, and the urgent ongoing efforts to secure additional releases. He condemned unequivocally the holding of hostages by Hamas, including many young children, one of whom is a 3-year-old American citizen toddler whose parents were killed by Hamas October 7th. The 2 leaders agreed that all hostages must be released without further delay. I think that was the first time we got some clarity or confirmation that children that young are being held hostage. A 3-year-old American citizen toddler, one of the hostages, Hal. I want to put up this photo as well. This is from Jacob Kornblue. He posted some of these photos. The IDF shares images from a bunker under Rantisi Hospital in Gaza with clear indications that some of the hostages were held there underground. I find that stunning as well. So back to the kind of Qatari question, Hal. Are they the right people to negotiate with to bring these hostages free? And what's taking so long, if so?
Well, the Qataris have been an interlocutor for a variety of things, dealing with Hamas and other groups for quite some time. They allow Hamas to actually have interest office, if you will, a foreign presence. Their leadership of Hamas actually live in Qatar, live quite well in Qatar, I should add as well. But right now, they're probably the best interlocutor for dealing with Hamas on this. There's been a number of signals that there is something underway in the hostage release regimen or program or whatever.
It seems like it, yeah.
Potentially up to 70 is a number I've heard of hostages. As you mentioned, young children, older hostages they're quite elderly, and they're looking at releasing them first. Those who are probably at greatest risk, shall we say. And so they're looking at some sort of deal. I think Hamas is asking for a 5-day ceasefire. I would be very surprised to see something like that happen, but you might see some sort of shorter ceasefire or significant pause in operations. But Israel's position on this has been that it's only through its direct military action, the pressure that's been put on Hamas, that they are now at the negotiating table. And they read that from the beginning, that Hamas is not going to freely allow these hostages to be released because it's the only leverage they have. The only way they're going to really come to serious negotiations in releasing a lot of hostages is if they feel tremendous military pressure to do so. And that's the conditions, if you will, that the IDF have helped put into effect, that they believe has led to this. And frankly, I can't say that I don't know if that's absolutely true, but I can't
Okay.
say as I disagree. It is one way to do it, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, Jonathan Shanzer, our friend at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, said this: Israel talking about a pause in fighting of 3 to 5 days in exchange for the Hamas release of children, elderly, women, and the sick. I guess from the outside in, I obviously don't have expertise in this area of the world, but you would think Qatar would have more leverage when it comes to negotiating or dealing with Hamas. That's kind of what I was thinking about all of this as well. Hal, last question on the Israel-Hamas war. And I asked you this Friday night, but there's been a lot of developments on this question. And I want to know why we're even talking about this question of who's going to control and rule in Gaza once the war is over. It seems like it's in the abstract, like it's a theory right now. It seems like we're so far away from even determining or answering that question. Bibi Netanyahu said he doesn't want it to be the Palestinian Authority. He thinks and acknowledges something you told me Friday, that Israel will have to do it for some time. But earlier, a couple of weeks ago, he disavowed the notion of reoccupying Gaza there in that interview with Fox's Bret Baier as well. I've also been hearing some U.S. officials say, maybe Qatar will have to come in and do it. Who's going to do it? And why are we even talking about this?
Well, Andrew, you pretty much brought out every possible thing I've heard.
Okay,
I've heard
okay.
A Qatar-led Arab coalition could go in there. Israel, of course, being on the ground, could go in there and do it itself, which causes a lot of political problems. The Palestinian Authority over the weekend was talking about that they would be willing to step in, that they would be willing to go in there. They previously said we will not ride into power in Gaza on the back of Israeli tanks, and then they seem to be backing off, saying, well, maybe we could ride part of the way on an Israeli tank. Well, maybe I'm being a little facetious, but they kind of softened their tone on that. And I kind of got the sense that there was something else going on, that maybe Israel wasn't all that, interested in having the Palestinian Authority rule them. And there's a lot of reasons why. There's a little bit of history there. If you go back to 2006, the Palestinian Authority was literally voted out. They voted Hamas in, which was really an indictment on the ability of the Palestinian Authority to administer governance, if you will, Gaza. So they might be looking for a third way to do this. Now, there are examples that are out there. A demilitarized, if you will, or a non-militarized Gaza Strip. Obviously, initially, they don't want to see any military capability out of Gaza. The U.S. has done something like that. We have what we call the Compact States of the Pacific. They're former U.S. territories or sovereign states. They have their own governments. They vote in the United Nations. They have international relations, but they are under special treaty where the U.S. provides their security needs and their homeland security needs. And I have a lot of history working on the homeland security part of what the U.S. government does for them with those countries. Then, of course, you have places like Costa Rica that decades ago decided to get rid of its own military, and they have no military. They just have a very robust police force. So there's a lot of examples of how Gaza could come about. But part of this is also looking at what the U.S. did going into Iraq in 2003. Our phase 4, if you will, was not the best planned thing, and we paid a huge price for lack of planning in that. So they're looking at all options. But initially, the reality is that in Gaza, Israel will be on the ground. They will be the de facto force that controls the ground. So the IDF has to deal with that. How they move from that to a less visible presence in day-to-day interaction with Palestinian civilians, how they deal with that as Gaza Strip is being rebuilt, which eventually will happen. They're going to have to rebuild it. That's a big question. And I think that's where you look at the Qataris. You also look at the Saudis,
Right.
Jordanians, the Emiratis. I think everybody is going to weigh in because nobody wants to see this thing. Nobody across, except maybe Iran, wants to see this thing ever happen again.
Okay.
So everybody has a vested interest to make sure that this is the last time that the Gaza explodes like this and becomes a threat that causes Israeli military action, certainly on the level that we've seen here.
Yeah, and you saw that kind of unfolding over the weekend in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, this massive summit took place with leaders, like 20 or 25 regional leaders about the Gaza situation specifically. So, Hal, let's just